Umdun Gombo Jagurayan La Janza Lo Gango Lodrö Dumni Dumdra Nyada Namdara Observe Jani Dongan Jibjan Zujani Jita Karala Omza Ganda Debi Zorar Maru Mandong Dungra Jizari and Rozo Ganlava Jita Jayan La Dujayan Danzong Dudraji Donyo Monyan Leji Jado Domza Jam Maru Mazir Dungurum Yaga Janya Jomza Rata Nao Doni Dajan Zapchin Dajan Yundan Lizo Jadi Tu Gujra Jadam Jini Jantim Dalu Mazir Jahurayan Lando Marabaza Nardo Marabaza Nardo Marabaza Marabaza Nardo Zedun Jijin Jiran Wazirji Dalu Dama Mambarav Zane Kadam Dam Jojan Ludo Bai Lodrö Bobi Nawa Jeda Zoro Nyarji Jembo Turdan Nime Jan Zone Malon Jembo Ngabjata Akira Dangam Zandu Jermerdo Domba Diji Janla Janzarlo Tani Namba Tamchela Gongzhou de la Kansam Jigin.
Good evening to everybody here.
Tani Ngaram So Teranga Chatete. And I'd
like to begin with this evening's talk.
Then also there can chat the Nangchu in the same detang, Tarab Kisoko Rentanga Tawazia, the Nizre.
The topic for this evening's talk is Buddhism, mental wellness, and contemporary values.
Then also Nangchu in the same detang. Tani Tarab Garantanga Tawa, Deni, Tani Shagui Gimson de Tani Karayan Zena, then also Tata Mi Simcom Gatola, Tani Natun Mambo, Mambos, Tani Jungo Yoje, the indeed Tela, Tangaso Nanchu Nani, Tapshikanti Yota Metitola, also Kapdafina Samgyo.
The reason that we're talking about this evening, the connection between Buddhism, mental well-being, and contemporary values, is that in this current age, we are experiencing a lot of issues in terms of mental well-being. And so it's for this reason that we are going to talk about whether there are some resources in Buddhism that may be of assistance.
Yeah. Tani Tomer Gato Tani Gato Museate, Candizela Zegorina, Gato Mugati Tripcha, Mutila Gato Tripcha Nindozi, Chitingato Tani Lipondere. So in
terms of Buddhism, we...
Yeah. Then got some Museade, Candizilla Zegorina, got some Mutila Tripcha Nindoze. Then he's cheating at so Semre, cheating, then got so Lipo, Mupote, then Yam the Sona, then got so Mos in it, and is.
So humans are seen as being made up of two components, that is their body and their minds, and when these come together we have what we know as a human. For this reason, if we don't have a good understanding of what the mind is, then it's not possible for us to have a good understanding of what we are as humans. So the first thing that we need to do is arrive at a clear recognition or understanding of what our minds actually are.
Simte Yapos Magona, then is Simte Langazo Chargi Yapo maybe Gimsenji, then Ingazola, Soaganala, Gangerpe, Mamboyungo.
It's on account of not having a good understanding of our minds, not having a good familiarity with them, that we encounter a lot of difficulties in our lives.
Then Simzea, Naso Simzea de Ganrazina, Lapala Zegayores in the Marese.
So what do we mean by the mind? Are we referring to our brains? No, we're not. However, the brain is a tool of the mind, but it's not the mind in itself. Is our mind our heart? That is the organ of our heart. No, it's not this either.
Tani gangrezina tani semzeati ngaso semganala tani ngaso lipo nala yonken tani mukatana zik tani taya menken tani niba mukserwa tani ngaso machama tani lipo nala yores.
So what our mind is something in our body, not something that we can see with our eyes, but something that has a particular power.
Tani semti ngaso choaganala choa demo tang kepo yongda mayong tani choa dungri yongda mayong teso changma khorang ka thachu shekyor.
In terms of our lives, whether they are happy and enjoyable or whether they are difficult and suffering, all of this is decided by our minds.
Tani ngaso muschi ka tani shawa leka yakpo leda male leka dupo le male teso changma yang khorang ka thachu kyor.
And the same whether a person undertakes good activities or bad activities, again, this is something that is also decided by the mind.
Tani tendi ga semte korang lapa mare yina korang lapa dan jirwa ha lepa chimbo yores.
So this mind is not the brain, however, it has an extremely close connection with the brain.
Tani ngaso semte yakpo z tani gosona tani ngaso kon choa ga nala tani pamba mombu yungare.
So if we have a good understanding of what this mind is, then it can bring us a great deal of benefit in our lives.
Tani semte ngaso namgin jongder she gores. Karte ngaso semte jongder mashina tani semkam go thola tani marche patang tani semkam go natta tani mombu yungare pena ngaso lipo te jongder mashina tani ngaso lipo wala tani nat mombu yungare tetang chikpares.
So we need to train our minds. If we don't train them, then they become unhappy, they give rise to illness, just as if we don't train our physical bodies, they also become unwell too. So it is the case with our minds. Of course, there are many levels of our minds.
Ngaso mugla tane koranga zing thongore teni nawala tene koranga yang jan thongore yang ngaso teni nala tene koranga teni zh thongore teso sangma ngaso semti nyamsim nyung nyamsim nyung yore.
So our eyes, they perceive sights or images, our ears, they perceive sounds, our noses, they perceive smells, and our mind is that which experiences all of these things.
Teni semte korang la teni jongder yakpo zo teni chadna teni korang ka nyamnyung te yakpo chivzang rore.
So if we're able to train our minds properly, then their experience, its experience of these things becomes increasingly better and better.
Perda ngaso lipo te la korang ka phonjer korang ka ngerwa te la teni rangshung ko chunyit ziran ko lui rangshung ko chunyit teni ngaso lipo la yore detang jabu ngaso simla sim ko ngerwa te la yang korang la rangshung ko chunyit teni zindose.
In terms of the processes of our physical body, our physical body has its own natural order or its own natural law, you might say, and the same is the case with our minds.
Teni korang ka ngerwa te kandizgen teni ti rangshung ko chunyit te ngaso hako gore.
And so in terms of its processes or operations, the changes that takes place within it, this is something that we need to have an understanding of. That is the natural order or the natural law by which our minds operate.
Teni ngaso semte teni korang ka rangshung ko chunyit te hako na teni korang phonjer kandi nyon gore ko yakpo ko sholan yeran ro yana dugpo ko sholan yeran ro teni ngaso yakpo zo teni hako thop gore.
And by understanding the natural attributes of the mind, then we also have gained an understanding of whether or how to develop our minds in a positive direction versus a negative direction.
Teni ti yendi ngaso ti nala ngaso namjin ngaso chowa nala teni yenda manda tamchi ka ha go goya ga teni korang ka rangshung ko chunyi jing dose.
So in terms of our lives, this is one aspect of the natural laws of things that we really need to have an understanding of.
나랑 저거 쌈나 남긴 같은 초왕 나라 용비 용이더니 샘톡라 등물 망보 용거요래 디 등물 대소 탐주봉 같은에 되니 슐로 거더니 초와가 차킨 약보 마용와당 뭐당 미 파르거더니 제와 약보 마용와다오다 되니 샤왈레카 약보 만저반다오 되니 슐로 거더니 슐로 공부보 거더니 용거 요 쌈네 같은 되니 쌈거레
In terms of the difficulties and unhappinesses that arise in our lives, we tend to look for reasons in the external world to account for them. So it might be an inadequacy or a lack of our material conditions, problems in interpersonal relationships, difficulties at work, or other reasons that lie in the external world. This is where we tend to locate the cause of our mental disturbance.
Then they raise it. That's what they same ganala market pata dungur mambo yongate shuloko yongo yonkentendi yore. Rete mambos halepa mambos ngato nani yongo yore.
And it is the case that some of our unhappiness and disturbances do derive from the external world around us. However, a great number or a great amount of our unhappiness, in fact, derives from inside our minds.
Teni shul uni tani teni shulo kotone teni ngacho sem kotola teni dumur teni yongyate nyungyung zmasto menduzi.
And in fact, the suffering that we experience that truly is derived from the external world is only very small.
Teni ngacho mi ma pena chakin halipa kyubu yinken chowa chakin halipa kyubu yinken tizu nala teni simla halipa deskit tang damba sim halipa debo yinken detang yinken teni mambun duzi.
There are in the world people with extremely impoverished conditions who nevertheless feel extremely happy and exist in a state of mental well-being. So it's necessary that we do some training for our minds, that we need to make some changes at the level of our minds.
Teni ngats sem ga nangla jongder jawya tela teni jongder te ramba mambun duze ramba mambun du teni kashi na jongder tela teni ngats chowa na la teni sem ga tola demo tang ke boyong ya teni je teni kashi na teni ju ngats be na nangchu teni nyamlin teni she ne teni sem to ko nyum ba chama me pa che teni ga jongder la goram mambu yore.
In terms of the training that we can do for our minds, there are many different levels. So one level is making adjustments or training our minds to have benefit in terms of our everyday lives, the extent to which we experience happiness, etc. Another level of mind training is that which exists in the Buddhist tradition, and this is a level of mind training that is directed to eliminating all of our afflictive mental states. So there are different levels of mind training that we can do.
Teni ramba jongder kandiz shi teni soso ranga teni takchen na ndrikerize pe na ngaso jongder tab debozu shi na tenga chun chowa na la demo ke boyong ya tang semkhung go tola nat mambo me ya teni yongore teni jongder te tang zapun ra o teni shi na teni ngaso nyom ba chama me pa ta teni sem go tola sham da nyar ji tang sherb ta te so yar jin ro ya teni go jongder chimbo shi na ndrikere te gangshi soso ranga takcho go gores.
And as to the level of mind training that someone might engage in, this is something that everyone has to decide for themselves. If a person wanted simply to do a simple kind of training, some kind of level of mental adjustment that would enable them to live a happy life, to live an existence that was relatively free of mental illness, then this kind of training exists. However, if one wanted to do a deeper or more profound level of training, training that is a kind of training that is directed to removing disturbing emotions completely and enhancing and increasing compassion and wisdom, then this is another level, a higher level of mind training. And as to which level of training a person might engage in, this is a matter of individual choice.
Teni ngacho tarta ngacho mi changma gandi she yor zina ngacho shuluk ko teni ngupo te pe yarji chimbo tanga yore rimban thumbu chimto che yo pe ra ngacho khangba je che jezang je teni ngacho langkhori na te so jezang roji ta teni ngacho teni te mai bin chwa na la yo pi yo shi changma pe na ngacho teni timcher o teni lokche teni rig so changma At
the moment in our lives, we really pay a great deal of attention to making improvements in our external world in terms of our material items. So our houses, our cars, they're constantly getting better and better. Our other items that we own, our computers, our other electronic goods, we're constantly upgrading them to the latest model.
Yena teni ngacho soso rang kanjigo ni remban thombo remba pargoa remba parwa tishen zejite soso rang teni remba te kanji pargo ngacho ha goya mares.
However, as to how we should go about elevating our own level, the level of our own minds, this is not something that we really understand very well.
Teni tenji yendi teni ngacho ngupo chama yar remba mambo parni teni thombo reze. Teni ngacho soso rang tini remba maparni teni ngupo changma ngacho lim thombo shi teni ngacho teni ngupo changma ngacho teni sheloko ngupo changma le mamu tenji reni de yori di kaps teni ngupo te chogo ngacho soso ngacho la dungur mambo teni yongya ma tok ba teni ngacho la phamba me pa tenji rendo res.
So when we exist in a situation where our external or material world continues to improve and in fact exists at a very high level, but at the level of our own inner development remains very low, then a big discrepancy in fact exists between the two. And in this situation, our material riches in fact begin to bring us only suffering rather than any major benefit.
Teni ngacho tangrab ko muzgina teni ngacho simti halipa ngupola tin chindo yores tin chindo wi jimsinji ngacho samna ngacho natun sama ngupo teni takcho ko yensamni teni samgo teni yendi teni ngacho ko simti teni jeweji nyamchung reze yela yu chuiro nyamchung teni kane jeweji nyamchung ro yores.
In terms of people in the contemporary world, we excessively rely on material things in the material world. We believe it is possible to solve all of our problems through material means. And for this reason, the resources of our minds become weaker and weaker.
Teni ti jimsenji ngacho tatan zambalang la teni me changma ga simkham ko thola nat jamja mambo yongya tang teni nat yung chite nache teni ni te nat mai na teni ngacho semgo tola machi pa mambo yung jimsinte ngacho rang teni tishan teni yar rempa par ma to jimsin jire.
And so it's for this reason that today in the world we see so much mental illness among many people, and aside from mental illness, just general unhappiness, this being pervasive. The reason for this being, of course, that we don't understand how to go about elevating or increasing or improving the level of our own minds.
Teni tangbo ngarang cho perna ngarang cho chimcher teni lo tangbo tang lo nipa te jile jirga jebzang royore ngarang cho khapar gshi khapar teni ni samba ta jipa ta ngapa ta tukpa jewe jirga zang teni ramba par ge yore rete nga so rang teni ramba par thap ge mares.
So our computers, they're constantly in a process of being upgraded to the latest model, this year's model, then next year's model. Our iPhones, we have the iPhone 3, then 4, then 5, but we lack any understanding as to how we can go about upgrading our own level, so to speak.
Teni ngupun so yarji mambo tang ne to ti nangla teni kap nga so rambapar matapna teni nga so teni ngupu te tala teni dewa nyamsun yongwa 대신 냠슨 용화들이 때 마트니 셈그 돌아나도 몽본종 김슨 수소런 거는 바빠르 마트비 김슨 지레.
So the reason that even though our external world and our material world continues to advance, continues to improve, but at the same time these advancements fail to bring us happiness and pleasure, the reason for this is that we are not able to improve our own level or improve ourselves at the same time.
Teni ngaso mukhashi samna de ngaso ranglapta rambapar ke iuna samne teni ko toba shinken yujirezi ina te yoreze ngaso sti yarji tana suso rang simda suso rang teni tsecho ko rambata yar parna te parkinduz.
Some people, of course, may doubt that there is a way or that there are ways for us to elevate or improve our own, the level of our minds in this way. However, there definitely are means available to us, means that enable us to elevate or improve the level of our minds and the level of our human existences.
Teni ngaso rambapar gona, mo rambapar gona teni liputi rambapar ya tapsi menduze, korang kale marateni teni geni makashinto ori liputi rambapar ya chembuz menduze, so semgo toni rambapar gonduz.
In terms of elevating or advancing the level of our minds, this is something that we are really only able to do in respect of our minds. There's no way that we can really achieve this in terms of our physical bodies. It's inevitable that our physical bodies will only increasingly become older and older. However, our minds are something that we are able to improve or increase the level of.
Teni ngaso semte rambakandi pargo oreze na ngaso semte yarje tangni semte halipa tubdang damba changdaze tubdang damba teni shego oreze teni tarta yenna ngaso go teni semte teni halipa tub chungchungre shilo kongupo chung zina teni ngaso semla markiba mambo zogre teni ngaso sem go teni yar ramba parne teni tubdang damba teni resona teni ngaso go teni shilo kongupo gangdang kangyona so
how do we go about increasing the level of our mind or raising the level of our mind? We do this by strengthening our mind, making it more powerful, making it more strong. At the moment, our minds exist in a very weak state, a state of not much power. And for this reason, small incidents in the external world are able to cause great disturbances to our weak minds. It's for this reason, therefore, that we need to strengthen our minds and make them more strong and therefore less susceptible to the disturbances of the external world.
Teni sem goramba parserla ngaso nangchu nala tapsipe mambuyor rete ina te nge teranti nane tab depose thamala ngocho sheke zete tab depote ngaraso nangchula tapashin kain na chokore tapa machine kain na chokore yana yishi chulungda pu chulu jambala tapashin kain na chokore mi changma te tapsi te peshe na chokore nge tenji thamala teni ngocho sheke.
So I would in terms of different means or methods or techniques for raising the level of our minds, there is an abundance in the Buddhist tradition. Tonight I would like to introduce a couple of simple methods to everyone, and these are methods that anyone can use regardless of who they are or what their background is, whether they are Buddhist or whether they are not Buddhist. These are methods that can be of use and benefit to anyone.
Teni ngaso gargi yenna lonyung yenna teni kiba yenna bume yenna musatang si yenna ngaso chowa gna la teni semgo tola kankak mambo teni yung sigre yenna ti kapse teni pesho tangna pantok yore samgdus.
And the method that I would like to introduce to you tonight is one that I feel that anyone could gain benefit from, whether they be old or young or male or female. It's certainly possible that for anyone that difficulties may arise in life. However, by applying this method, it is certain that anyone or everyone could gain benefit.
Teni tangbong atsu sim ga teni koranga orangshung gu chunit koranga nyerwa ga teni chunit chik te ngatsu shigo ndus.
So the first thing we need to do is have an understanding of the natural or the basic characteristics or the basic attributes of our minds.
Teni perna tambun dindi zereze ngaso perna ngatsun choa nangla teni ta natun chung dindi yin yang teni natun de ngarang la teni ta kavli mambo zogundu ngarang la dungur mambo zogundu samni dindi samna teni semte kale teni gumni teni namjik teni ngaso tan choa nangla tondak chung le mena teni sem gtola dungur mambo yongwa teni rendo undu korang teni changro undu ngaso semte.
So usually in our everyday lives, when small things arise or small incidents happen, we tend to regard them as creating a lot of difficulty and a lot of disturbance for us.
Bejana ngacho teni mi kashi la teni namshi nima jumbo inna yang kon zhe ge mendu sam ge ore yang namshi zhangmo inna yang kon zhe ge mendu sam ge ore teni long jamna yang korang lan zhe ge mendu sam ge ore teni yang Tesu sama ga tone pe na namshi chipo ga tone na teni mambo ga teni korang la ten je kemendu den je kemendu te korang la ka zondu de korang la ka zondu samni tenji ga teni kumdo res.
There are some people, for example, who feel unsatisfied when the weather's warm, also feel unsatisfied when the weather's cold, when it's windy, they're not satisfied either. And just on account of the state of the weather, they find themselves in a state of feeling rather disgruntled and unsatisfied.
Teni ngaso lamkha la teni lamkhur khonsang tuche. Khonsang te karma singi gyamna teni ngaso semgna la ma ki pa chagne halebo teni dungur teni yongo yarese.
And there are others who, encountering maybe just 1 or 2 minutes of a traffic jam, find themselves feeling unbearably unhappy.
Yeah, teni ngaso yang namzhe nani ndona yang namzhe te karma kashi je karma chinda o karma chwanga ndo teni yang teni par jila laksona yang ngaso sem maki pa yone yang mongbu teni simla teni madiwa mongbu yongo yarese.
And others who find themselves feeling extremely unhappy when their aeroplane is late by 20 or 15 minutes.
Teni techu korwate tani shirtang tondak chung zreze pe tondak chimboz mare yena teni ngaso sem go teni te tondak chimbo re samne teni samdena te ngaso ngone tani tondak chimbo re ndo ndu sem gna la.
So even though all of these things are very small kinds of incidents, nevertheless, when our minds view them as big incidents or major incidences, then truly these incidents do become big and major.
Teni ngachun soa nangla, teni mushila samlo tana ngachun soa nangla, te nupa te mangbo shirtang yongoreze, penna kashi na mo ngachola teni kaja shalita, leka leata tso ngachola nupa yongyandao. Yang kashi ne pe na rangshong kham ge teni mo maim ba so no pa yong ya da teni no pa chung de ngachun soa na la namgi mangbu yongres.
It's true that in our everyday lives we do incur quite a lot of disturbance, whether it be from people, the things they say to us or the things that they do, or otherwise various disturbances that come from the natural world. We face these kinds of things all the time.
Teni tendi kapsa teni no pa chung de yongwi kapsa teni ngaso semge o tan de ngarang la no pare de ngarang la dumru zogundu de ngarang la maki pa zogundu samne teni semge te yinda yin yang ni yang de te samna de ngaso semge na la teni gumni semge na la gumni teni namjigna dumru chung yongna ti dumru chung de so ngaso la teni semge tola maki pa chimbu zong kan teni jene ngaso semde kem sarwo teni changro ndu ngaso mi semde.
So when we begin to think like this then and identify these incidences as a source of disturbance and harm for us, as a source of our suffering, as a source of our unhappiness, and we think like this about these incidences back and forth, time and time, over and over again, we become accustomed and habituated to thinking in this way, and then these small kinds of things that happen bring us a great sense of suffering, and this is a strange way that the mind operates.
Teni perna aso ndiksayen na perna teni chokse da tezn thona gas tez mamoyen na tan da tez machin dengan tezn thona gasam yang te zum tho sona yang nga te zum mana ga ndra zum tho chin du sam yang deni metok dan deni karbuzu jana ga sare sam yang te mare yang marbuzu jana ga sare sam ta tinji ga tenin choa ga la mambu ti thola teni thau thi je ti thola har je ba zeri tinji mambu tinji she dena teni namjik teni nga so sem ga na la teni demo tang kipo yongya ga teni ngupo chigyang me pare changma de gang yin na nga so sem ga na la ma ki pa zo ta ma di zo tinji ta ta chang zo re.
So if we find ourselves in a situation where the height of the table we find too high, we lower a bit and it seems too low, we're not happy with the color of the flowers, we don't like the white ones, we change them to red ones, we don't like them either, then this kind of fussiness, if it becomes too much in our lives, then in fact nothing in the material world will be able to bring us happiness and satisfaction, and everything will start to bring us unhappiness and dissatisfaction.
Teni tinjire songdi nga chogon choa chakin teni pe yakbu yo na yang teni yang nga cho teni namjin teni dungmer mambo yong nga yong res choa chakin pe yakbu yo re te yina ti chakin ti so teni pe na nga cho ya da sani nga yar lang na ni komba kari kong ge maru kong ge yin da yang mumbo kong ge yin da yang seru kong ge tolla kari kong ge malla kari kong ge lam kari kong ge teni ko ra thana ti so yang teni mi sem ko na la teni dungmer zo yong res.
So if this is the way we are, then even if our material conditions are extremely good, they will only bring us suffering. So waking up in the morning, contemplating what to wear, blue, red, yellow, what should we wear on our top, what should we wear on our bottom, what sort of shoes should we wear, ultimately existing in this state, we find ourselves in suffering.
Teni chapartanga so damga mambo yongkeng ga motsola damkha mambo yongkeng ga matesola teni sem yakbo mena teni ti dumar mambo zogndus.
Particularly for people who have a lot of choices in their lives, if their minds are not healthy, then they often experience a lot of suffering.
Teni nga chon choa yarji song charna teni damkha mambo yores. Yarji song chari ne kabna teni damkha mambo yona teni ti kapsa nga cho sem yarji tang gognduk ma to nga cho choa yarji ngubu un choa yarji song sem yarji ro matavna teni nga cho te ngubu un choa ti sem la dungmar mambo zogndus.
So as the material conditions of our life develop and improve, then we find ourselves with more choices. And in this situation, it's very important that we do improve the level or raise the level of our minds. If we are not able to do so, then our advanced material conditions will only bring us suffering.
Teni tendi na teni thama nga so kanji changro nduzena dungmer main na yang teni tandi dungmer ndi ngarang la dungmer zong du samne tendi samba yongndus.
Because otherwise, the ultimate situation we will find ourselves in is one where even when we are not suffering, we nevertheless think that we are, and that various objects are bringing us suffering.
Beni tangbo ti jimsen te nga so hakko gores.
So the first, or the most important thing is that we first understand the reason for this.
Teni nga so ta semte thola teni demo tang kipo teni yongya teni zakate yongya na gabo yona Gandishe gores na teni nga so semte par dungmer gang yongna ya ti khorang teni shikin te matupa teni top dang damba teni zo go ndose.
So if we are going to train our minds to be of use in this situation, then we need to make them strong so that when they meet with disturbances from the external environment, that they are not affected in an adverse way.
Teni tela nga so jongder shegindu jongder chongchong she go ndose sem go tone.
So in order to do this, we need to do a simple training in respect of our minds.
Teni tangbo pe na nga cho teni namshi nyama chachi wanda da yana charwan ba banda yana long yine teni tezin chakbo shonganda o teni inare yana lamkhala teni langkhor teni karmasik da ni teni gakpa gaksonganda o teni inare teni chongchong go thola nga so teni ngot jondr shia ngot go ndus.
So we need to start off with incidents or times when the weather's a bit hot or it's a bit rainy, when it's a bit windy or a bit cold, or when we find ourselves in a traffic jam for 1 or 2 minutes. We need to start off with these kinds of experiences.
Teni ngaso ti ngupu sowa nangane ngaso sem ko tola dumur te yong kapse teni dumur tela teni tangbu ngaso kangsam ko jena ondi dumur te ngi tang de lengyen te natun chimbuz mare te natun chimbuz chi mundu te ngi tanglin chi gen samni teni sam ko gres.
So the first thing that we need to do when we experience these minor forms of suffering is accept them, take them on, recognize that they are not major events or major circumstances, and be willing to take the experience on, to accept it.
Teni dumur yena teni ngaso chorwa dumur tela yang kola yang yondun gi cha teni yores kola yondun yang yores kola kyun tak tak mare kola yondun yores.
And we need to recognize that incidents or experiences of suffering in our life, in fact, have their beneficial qualities or aspects as well. They're not completely bad.
Ngaso kandi tagarezena chorwa dumur tela teni ngaso kyun tak tak tagare ngaso chorwa dumur yena kyun tak tak yen sabba ma tok ba chorwa dumur tela lipo dumur yena sem go dumur yela yena tela yondun yo sambate ngaso namgin ngaso sam go mareze.
Generally, in terms of suffering that we experience in our lives, whether it be physical suffering or mental suffering, we only concentrate or we fixate on the negative aspects of the experience. We seldom think that the experience of suffering that we are undergoing actually has some positive and beneficial qualities.
Teni ngaso chorwa dewa tela teni kyunji cha zindu yang yondun gi cha yore chorwa dewa la ni yore den rabbo ngaso chorwa dumur tela yang so
in terms of happiness or experiences of happiness in our life, these experiences have positive and negative aspects, and so too does suffering. Suffering also has positive and negative aspects.
Teni chorwa dumur tela te kandigone teni yondun tago rezena pena ngaso chorwa dumur chungchung ngaso la yona teni ngaso chorwa dumur te par gagna.
So in terms of small experience of suffering in our lives, if we resist them, then the suffering that they bring us will only become greater and greater.
Teni karting atso te par margagne o te dumurte te naton chimpo zu mare ngarang ka tang de lengyen te naton chimpo modu perna charwate zambabna te naton chimpo ju mendu teni long te jamna te naton chimpo mendu lamkhala karma chi karma ni tin tin khorsang jamne garjana tin natun chimbo mare samne tinji sim gu chorwa tini yit maung wate aran so tang de lain jagna tini khwarang tini dungur maim baz changdo gores.
If we don't resist these minor experiences of suffering, if we take them on, if we accept them, so we don't make a big deal about whether it's raining a little bit or it's a bit windy or whether we're caught in a traffic jam for 1 or 2 minutes, if we're able to accept these experiences in this way, then they will cease to generate suffering for us.
Teni ngaso teni dumur chongchong techo la teni ngon zigne teni jongder chena teni kale teni sem ko tokla dumur chimbo teni yongna yang ti dumur chimbo te ngaso khorang yondun da teni susorang yarji tang ya teni ga tapshizula par girth gres.
So if we start out with minor forms of suffering and increasingly train ourselves, we will find that when we experience then greater forms of suffering in our life, that we will be able to recognize their positive and beneficial qualities as well as the opportunity they present for us to improve ourselves.
Dumur chora dumur tela yondun ziyore te yondun de kangre zina te yondun de ngaso tangbo ha ko gore ngaso mang chiwa ga samla chora dumur la yondun kare yo mare dumur yenna kyun tak ma to de yondun ze me samni teni sam go yore ta tela yondun khashi zin dos.
In fact, experiences of suffering have their positive aspects, and this is something that we need to recognize. In general, we are not accustomed to identifying the positive aspects of suffering. We focus only on the negative aspects of the experience, but there are, in fact, several positive aspects of suffering.
Teni ngaso pe na nangchu go teni chu nyamlin shin ke teni zi na ti dumur ke na la teni soso rang yarje tong ya ga tapshi ta yondun mongbo zi ti na la len ya yore.
And in the Buddhist teachings, there are many ways for drawing benefits from experience of suffering to improve one's own mind.
Teni nangchu nyamlin shin ke mayin ba teni ta nangchu la tapa menkin in Indrawota yana chulu ka tapa tsavane menkin tindizi na yang teni khorang ka sem ka thola yo pi tsora dungmer te tanglin shina teni ti thola yondun khashiz teni yores.
Not just for Buddhist practitioners, or aside from Buddhist practitioners, for people who are not Buddhist practitioners, there are still positive aspects that can be drawn from accepting experiences of suffering.
Teni yondun tangbodi kangrezina ngaso sem ka thola sosola teni dungmer yongna teni tela teni ngaso mi jamba namla teni jamda nyangji teni yabu kethap kare.
The first positive potential of suffering is the capacity it presents, or the opportunity it presents, for increasing our compassion and loving kindness for others.
Teni soso rangla teni dungmer yongna teni tela teni soso go dungmer te lipo ta sem ko thola nyamnyong tela teni ngaso mi jamba la ropa pe yabu shithap kare.
So, based on or using one's own experience of suffering, physical suffering or mental suffering, we will be able to use this experience to be able to help other people more effectively.
Teni shirtang la so sem ko thola dungur menking go matindi zina teni janla teni jamdanya ji ke anda ota teni janla rokpa che teni ya shena chok re tawani chok mare ze mare riti inna yo soso rang thola teni dungur nyamnyong teni yongking inna teni teli kyang teni chu gyachimbo ta shikchimbo go ne mi janla teni shamnyang ji ke thap kare.
So this is not to say that a person who doesn't experience suffering is not able to cultivate their compassion and loving kindness towards others and effectively help others. However, someone who does have their own experience of suffering will find themselves in an even better situation, or even better equipped to cultivate these positive qualities of loving kindness and compassion.
Pe jana makashi teni korang napa rene teni korang la nat teni tsap chimbo teni tep teni kapsi teni korang ka lig toda sem ka tola teni dungur mambo teni yongne nyamnyong teni korang rang nyamnyong nyong jati teni korang tazu teni mi napa so dungur te kanda yang korang tazu yakboz teni chatangwaz shia teni yongres.
For example, a person who becomes seriously sick, they contract a serious illness and suffer significantly in their physical bodies as well as in their minds. Through this experience, they're able to cultivate a really complete and penetrating understanding of the experience of sickness that other people endure.
Teni pe jagna teni masjid yores teni masjid yore ti mati teni khorang teni khorang da nyamde teni khorang mi mambo ta nyamde teni yoi kapse teni chamala zamazaya me pine kumna teni mi mambo muke shinduze mi mambo muke shindu teni khorang yang teni zamazaya me ne teni muke shishi omareta ena khorang dungur mambo teni nyamsim nyong duze teni ti dungur teni nyamsim nyong jimsinji teni khorang ga semtak jani ta ngarang ga matsin dala teni nge me teni zaji me pa tang konji me pa tenji ga matsola teni ropa jingkang ga mo o tari nga ka te she masona o tari ga teni ngarang teni she masona teni nge mo tenji su che ga yen samne teni khorang teni semtak jani teni khorang matsis chila teni me jala ropa jingkang ga mo tenji chak songse.
And it's possible for a person who experiences great hunger along with others. A great hunger experiences the suffering of starving, not having enough to eat, however, not dying as a result of this experience, but having an acute experience of the feeling of hunger the basis of this may decide that from this point onward, not since they haven't died themselves, to dedicate the rest of their lives to being of assistance to those who are hungry and without clothes, etc. That is, their own experience of suffering can provide the basis for a future resolve to help others.
Teni korang ka jima teni ten zambolang la yongken ka teni zaki menken kyunji menken me mambo la korang ka teni pantok teni yakbo teni shwe song tam duze ten ngarang ko ngoshiwa ka drobo shireze teni karti mi te ti kapsa kola zaki me pa kyunji me pa ka teni dumur te mayong na teni korang matsen di nang la teni me mambo la teni rokpa shinken ka ma teni zi chaktab ka mareze.
And in fact, I have a friend who was exactly like this, based on their own experience of suffering in this way. They dedicated the rest of their life to being of assistance to hungry and bereft people all over the world. And if they hadn't have come upon this circumstance or this experience of suffering themselves, then they never would have made this life resolve in the way that they did.
Teni yang makashis teni korang napa rene teni napa rene teni repi jis teni korang ga teni napa chogo teni dumur de shini oda nge ngarang rapo teni napa te chola nge rokpa che yen zene korang ga matse ti nala teni napa chola teni rokpa che ne teni korang ga matse ti nala yang napa pe mangbola teni pantok thumken teni ga machang doze.
And it's also people who go through an experience of serious sickness themselves and endure the suffering of it, to then dedicate the rest of their lives to being of assistance to others who have experienced the same kind of sickness. So, and in so doing, being of benefit to many, many people.
Teni ngacho mmangchi shuti kandizereze na pena ngacho mi korang teni mjorwa pamjur kuteni tsuwa pe kipu yongken teni ziyena teni chobu tso kuteni nesrite koranga hako yo mare mi chobu tso teni zaji mepa kyunji mepa tese wo dumur te kanti zi mambo hako mare teze hako re ta yena teni nyamnyung kutongra po teni zi hako yo mare.
The way things are generally is that people who enjoy great economic abundance generally don't have a good understanding of the suffering that people endure who are impoverished. Of course, they may have some kind of vague understanding, but they don't have any experiential understanding of this situation.
Teni mi wangcha yongken ka teni mutusoga teni wangcha menken da nyamchung kosogo teni dungur te kandizgen te koranga tezi kogore ta yena nyamnyung rapo teni teni yang tak baza teni korang shitab go marais.
And the same for the powerful. They often don't have a good understanding of the suffering of the meek and powerless. That is, they may have some understanding but no direct experience of it.
Teni te magona teni ngaso pena mi jamba so dungur te kandizgen teni koso nyamnyung go tone yakboza ha magona teni ngaso mi jamba so dea yona dungur yona te ngaso namik rapo chene tela teni chi tonang mashiwa teni shegres.
And it's if we don't have a direct experience of the kinds of suffering that are endured by others, then it's very easy for us to not pay attention to it and to become rather indifferent.
Teni tenji na ngaso te dumur te teni ta yongna ngarang so changma kanti samgreze na ngala dungur mena ga samni teni samgreze te khak manduk ze ngaso changme teni samgo yore je te karte ngaso dumur te teni yong sona teni dumur te la ngaso peshu tangna peshu yabo tangji yore.
Of course, everybody doesn't wish for suffering, and this is not something that we can blame anyone for. Naturally, everybody thinks like this. However, once suffering does arrive upon us, it's important that we really utilize it well.
Teni tendi shetab sona teni soso go teni nyarji yarjin ro rese dumur la teni.
And if we are able to do this, then it's possible to use our suffering to increase our compassion.
Teni ngaso mi changma mi yenare tele jamba tendru yenare teni choksak changma la teni nyarji yakbo teni keshin gen mo shamdang nyarji yongken teni zre sona teni ngarang so rang teni msi te ngune tani tondang damba tindi resongare di toni nga chu mi mangbo la phantokores.
If we can become people who are able to generate a strong, loving kindness and compassion for humans and animals, then we can really become people who live meaningful lives and are able to be of benefit to a great number of beings.
Teni nga chu muschik mtschik nangla teni ngune tani teni tondang damba te gang reze nga chu shawa kandiz drip sona mtse tondang damba reze go reze na nga chu titola tatsar mambu yores.
In terms of a human life, what really constitutes meaningful action or meaningful experience, this is a question that there are many different opinions in respect of.
Teni mkhashi ga samlo tana ngarang mi katak jan teni chaksona teni nga chu ngarang ga mtse tondang damba re samne teni sam gyore. Teni mkhashi ga samlo tana ngarang teni pe mshigbu teni chaksona teni ngarang mtse tondang damba re sam gyore. Mkhashi ga samlo tana da ngarang pe wangcha chimbo yongken teni resona teni nga mtsin da tondang damba re songare samne teni sam gyore.
Some people think that if they were to become famous, then their life would be very meaningful. Others think that if they were to become very rich, their life would be very meaningful, while others feel that if they were to acquire great power, then their lives would have meaning.
Inayang tini ngune tani tu ngupu tola tini ngatsu tini mtsi tondang damba ngoma te kangrezina mi jambal tang tini chokchak jambala tini pan yokbo tongken tini resona tini ngune tani mtsi tondang damba te res.
However, in actual fact or in reality, what really constitutes a meaningful life is being able to be of benefit to other humans and other beings.
Tinti yendi ngatsu pena tini nat pena nani pena chi tini ta makashi kashi tini korang enzig nat tini korang la natik tini lila yopa tini shisongwi jini tini korang ka tini enzig napa tsola tini pen rokba mamboshi tini shini mtsi tondang damba resongwa rao ta tini mangbo rezi.
There are, for example, many people who, after discovering that they have become HIV positive, therefore then devote their lives to helping other AIDS sufferers, and their lives become very meaningful in the process.
Tani ngatsu tsama ga tini susula nat mena gaga yorese ngatsu na yona gangken chijang yaw mare rite inna yang tini karte ngatsu lipo utola nati shung sona tani ngatsu te par gagna o ta nga na shung son ta nga dungur resong ta nga masiti yakpo chakma son ta nga cholak tang son tini samna tani ngatsu dungur ti chichin ro res.
Of course, everyone would prefer not to be sick. However, if illness is something that we truly do encounter, then it's important that we don't resist it. If our approach is, oh, I've become sick, I'm really in great suffering, my life has become a complete waste and completely meaningless, if this is the attitude that we take, then our suffering will only become greater and greater.
Tani karti ti nga so la nati tani shung sona ta nga so ti nati par mebashi guna nga so kangta mebashi tabgo yaw marezi ta mathamna nga so ti tanglin chi go re tanglin shi jagna tani nga so peshu yakbo zo tangna yang nga so la tini yang tini ti nangni tani phamba sarwa tini yongores.
So if a particular illness is not one that we are able to heal, then we need to accept it and utilize it. And if we're able to do so, then it will be able to bring us a new kind of benefit.
Tani pena mukhashi tini rezi, pena mukhashi ga tini lipo takshat shini, tani ta lipo uthola nandu zi, pena mamba ga kyorang la nandu, tani kyorang los ching ma tokpa ta ndukthasa mare, yana lo sheka ma tokpa kyorang la tsi mundu tinti zena tani mangbu zika donda tangbu ti kare samgare zena oya tani nda ngarang lan tinti chonggo wi jimtsang kare yana nanti ngarang ka thokla yonggo wi jimtsang kare yana samne jimtsang kare zena ngalan da yonggo wi jimtsang kare samne tinti samdo gore ze shirtang khocho go samlo ndabo ti kare zena nda mi jambala yongna ngarang la ma yongna ndabo tinti samgo gore.
Some people, they go to the doctor for a physical examination, and the doctor diagnoses them with an illness and perhaps gives them only 1 year or half a year to live. How many people react in this situation is by asking themselves, why has this happened to me? How has this befallen me? In general, they tend to think that this is something that only happens to others and is not likely to happen to themselves.
Teni ti kapsa teni ngarang la teni nate shonsong mi jamba tsangma la nate yungu mendu ngarang la teni nate shonsong ten jamnyim mayim pare jamnyim mare teni samlo mambo tane teni dungur mambo yong teni ti semtok dungur ti nate yang chechin drone teni tse rangbo mata pa teni changro res.
And thinking that everyone else is fine, they've not contracted this illness, but I have, how unfair is this? By thinking in this way over and over again, then the suffering of the person increases and the symptoms of their illness worse, and then ultimately they find themselves truly not living for a long time.
Tini tendi endi ngaso tangbo ngaso tini ngupo go nelik chige ore te ngaso tanglim shego kelim shego ores.
So the important thing in this situation is to accept the basic character or the basic attributes, the reality of our situation.
Teni ngupo go chunye te kangreze na te la martak baze greze nangchu go na la martak baze greze.
And the basic attribute of phenomenon is impermanence.
Teni martak baze yate teni ngaso go lipo yena ngaso go semi yena teni kangdang kangana tsama ngerwa andamanda teni nrodeya tela teni martak baze yores.
So that our bodies and our minds, etc., are constantly changing. This is what we refer to as impermanence.
Teni martak baze yate ngupo go chunye reze ten zambalang go molayang yongore chokshaklayang yongore rangshong kamlayang yongore teni ngatson zambalang sakola mayena teni jikting go kamdela tsangma teni martak bat ti nangla nro yores.
And impermanence is a basic characteristic of our world. It's a basic characteristic of humans, of animals, of the natural world, of the entire cosmos.
Teni ti gimsanji teni ngatso o ta ngarangla teni nat yongna re teni mando pakana yongna re te yongore ta te ngubo kharang go chunye tinji re kharang teni mambu yongore te ngarang chipo mare mi mambo la tinji yongo yore samne te sam go yores.
So it's important when we do become ill to recognize this and recognize that this is the way things are in terms of impermanence. Illnesses happen like this. They happen to many people, not just myself.
Teni ngi ta dungmernde teni ngaranga teni tapshi shishine teni te lapicha teni yantak baga lamla par girkiyen samne te sam go yores. Ta ngarang dungmer teni so ngarang napa reson ngarang tedi reson de yena te kyo mare ngi dumurnda tab beshud yak botongo yen samne te sam go yores.
And at this time, it's important to reflect on one's situation and decide to use the experience of illness and the suffering as a positive force.
Teni beshud tanserte kangreze na ngaso nangchu nangla teni tabshi chi yoreze te kyaranso nangchu nyamni shinka main na yang ngaso beshud tangna teni njugre nangchu nangla tabshi chi yoreze.
And how in terms of going about utilizing illness for its positive potential, there are methods in the Buddhist teachings. These methods can be used, however, by everyone, regardless of whether they are Buddhist or not.
Tini tela karizna darjin jiva zigriz darjin jiva dardangani jiva.
And the name of this method is exchanging self for other.
Teni darjin jiva se yati kandiz rezena perna ngarang la tinti nat tinti shong sona o ti ngarang la yo goa kanti na mi jamba tsama la sikyang mayoni ngala yung goa te ngarang la jamni mayembare tinti samyang mareze o ta ngarang la tinti nat yona ja ngarang la tinti dumur yona ja tini nge dumur de la tini mi jamba nam go dumur te me pas nge chege yon samni tinti sam go res.
So in using this practice, we shouldn't think that it is unfair that we have become ill when others haven't. And it's important instead that we take the approach or determine to use our experience of illness or experience of suffering to help us eliminate the sufferings of others.
Teni tabshite kangyozena, teni tabshi ni yoze, teni shite nga tso sim go tokne kandi sam go te yinze. Ni pade nga tso lipu go tokne leka kandi le go tere, ni dereze, tabshi ni yoreze.
And in terms of going about this method of practice, there are two techniques that we can use, and one involves how we reflect in our minds on our situation, or how we reflect in our minds, and the other is what conduct we do or what action we do with our bodies.
Teni sem ko tola kandi sam ko zena tambo teni sam ko reze pena ngarang la nat teni shone teni mamba teni juya mepa teni zre la losing da loni da teni ma to pa deg mareze ne teni ze sona teni nge kandi sam ko reze na ota ngarang la teni nat teni tep songze teni nga mayin na teni zambol lang tola me teni mambo la teni yoreze oya yona teni ngarang teni nat ti tep sona teni nge nan de la teni mi jamba chama na teni men teni mepa cha o ngarang na ti mi jamba cho na chama ga chapsi ni teni nge nyamsum yong go yense nge zambalang ga ngarang dawo teni na yongken ge mi chama ga chapsi ni teni nge na ti nyamsum yong go yin ngarang chipo na ti tangnen che ge yin teni mi jamba thamche na ti men ro go samne sim go to ni molum teni jab go res.
So in terms of the first of these methods or techniques, if we find ourselves in a situation where we become ill and there is no possibility of curing our illness, perhaps the doctor tells us we only have a short time to live, then it is important that we recognize that we acknowledge that we have become ill, this is our situation, but that it's not just ourselves who are in this situation, that there are many people like us in the world who are also ill and suffering from illness. And so we use this experience that we are in to make a resolve to use our experience of illness and in order that everyone else who is suffering this same illness may be cured from it. So that is, we make a strong aspiration and prayer that we may take on the suffering of others, that is, that we may be the substitute for their suffering, and that on the strength of our own personal suffering, others may be cured. And we make a prayer like this.
Teni nat chibo marezi teni nat re teni ti tola perna korang teni mjorwa mepachane worwo chak sona oda ngarang worwo chak sona teni zambalong ko machama worwo ko teni dungur chama te ngarang ko dungur ti teni par kochot teni te ngarang chibo ti nyamsunyo ama to pati me jamba samala teni worwo ko dungur tenja te mayung zeni teni molum gyap go res tenja po perna nga su sem ko tola yenare lipo tola na teni dungur kandang kang yung na yang dungur te tambo nga so la yung ikaps o nga teni dungur yung jimsen chire nga teni yung na ngarang la teni njamni mayim bare teni samlo matang la chi teni samlo matang ne o teni nge dungur di ta mi chama dungur par meba shi mi chama dungur de ngarang ndi chapsi ni te nge nyamsin yung go samne teni yung dershi go res.
So it's not just in respect of illness that we can do this practice. If we find ourselves in a state of poverty, then we can also use this experience, use it and by making a strong wish that through our soul experience of poverty, that the poverty of others who are suffering like us can be eliminated. And we can do this practice in respect of any kind of mental or physical suffering that we encounter. So when suffering falls upon us, we shouldn't immediately think, oh, it's so unfair, it's so unjust that this is happening to me. Instead, we should really make a strong prayer and aspiration that we may take on the suffering of others, and that through our taking on of the suffering of their suffering, that they may be freed from their suffering. And we should work on training ourselves in this way.
Teni tindi jondar shepi nerkam na tambo ngacho tindi sem ko nala yakpo samthab ko mareze te yang tak baz samthab ko mareze yena kale samna teni ngacho jondar tindi shena teni te titsu te rambun rawore na ti kapsa teni ngacho nguni tane sem ko thoni samthab ko reza o ta ngarang napa chagna ngarang orbo chagna ngarang ko lig thola dungreona sem ko thola dungreona teni nge dungrendi teni semchen sama dungre par mebache simchen sama dungur nyamsung yong margowa ngarang chikpo nyamsung yong teni nge simchen sama sapshi ni teni nge dungur yong yang sambate khorang ka ngone tane sim ka tane khaji nimi ka teni sam thawya teni rendo oreze kale teni jondor shina tenga so nyimasigla teni sam thapkres.
Of course, this way of thinking, or this way of practice, is not something that we will be able to perfect immediately. It's something that we need to work on gradually and step by step, and we will find our practice becoming stronger over an extended period of time, such that at one day we really truly will be able to reach a point in our practice where genuinely, when we encounter illness or poverty or physical or mental suffering, that we automatically and genuinely wish that through our sufferings all beings may be freed from their experience of a similar suffering, and that through our taking on of their suffering, that is through suffering in their stead, that they need not experience suffering themselves. And it is possible through training ourselves for us to generate this kind of response really from the very depths of our hearts.
Tini tela jondr gom gyapsar ka tini tab debo ziore zite jondr shesar ka tabshi tini tab debo ziore tini sim ko tola tini gom gyapya ka tini tabshi tab debo ziore.
And in respect of this kind of mind training, there is a simple meditation practice that we can do.
Te kare zena tini nga cho rang tini lida semda tini lig dewa tang sem go dewa kepa dikhe changa te tini pe na nga cho so rang la ta yopi tini dema dewa tang kepa tang so changma tini o tini lung rwa chiti lung karu tini zrene tini nga so lung nga so khadang na na ne lung par tong ne kamna tini ti so par sone tini zambalang ma changma la tini ti lung te tini phogni tini me changma tini ngarang ge dewa te par khosola jinba ta pe na ngarang ge gomba de mar phni pe na masjid tini changmore ni changyo tini khakyo na tini ngarang ge gomba de mar phni kholang la para yok dawa jakbandago tini shine ngarang ge dewa tang ngarang ge kepa tang tini ngarang la yopi tini changma de parnge tini jengyen samne tini sam tini ngarang ge dewa tang kepa changma og ngarang ge og parndo winer kumna hushirwa og do winer kumna tini og karu tini zreni tini mi changma la tini og te phogne tini mi changma de mo ke bore song samne tini sam go yores.
And this practice is or this particular meditation, in this particular meditation, we visualize all of our happiness, all of the happiness that we hold and possess, whether it be in terms of our bodies or our minds. And when we exhale, we imagine our exhaled breath as white in color, and embodying all of our happiness that we possess. And we visualize this white breath that we exhale making contact with all beings in the world. So just as we might reach out to a person with no clothes and take an item of clothing off our own backs and give it to them, and thereby alleviate their suffering, through doing this practice whereby we give all of our happiness to others through our exhaled breath, we make an aspiration, or we make a great prayer, and as we are breathing out, that all of our happiness reach others and that they may enjoy all of the happiness that we have to give them.
Tenin zambalang ka teni mo tsama ka teni lig dungmar tang sem ka dungmar tsama te teni pena mo orbo ka dungmar mo napa ka dungmar me nyamchung ka dungmar teni dungmar tsama ta te mayambi mi chipo matsapa teni sokshak jamba tendron rapo tsu tsama ka dungmar tamche te teni oguk nakpo teni zrene teni ngarang ka oguk sar kadang na ka sar ngpine kamna teni tsama teni soso nakpo zrene teni ngarang la thamne teni ngarang go teni ta mi tsama ga chapsi ni teni ngarang ga dungmar temyong go yin ngachpo go dungmar nyong zambalang ga tsama teni orbi dungmar me navi dungmar me teni nyamchong go dungmar me ngarang chipo tsama ga chapsi ni nge dungmar te nyamsumyong go yin sambandawo teni gomgyap go reze te jongdr zreze.
And then as we inhale, we imagine that all of the physical and mental suffering of all beings, the physical and mental suffering of those who are poor, those who are ill, those who are marginalized, animal suffering, etc., that all of this suffering takes the form of the breath that we inhale. It's black in color. And as we inhale this black vapor, we make a wish that we, in the place of all beings, in their stead, may take on all of their suffering, and so that they not need to experience any suffering themselves. And we practice in this way, we train ourselves in this practice of meditation.
Teni tendishini ngarang tsogo sem go de parshi go reze ngatso sem go ke yangbo shini sem go parshi ni teni tsangma ngatso sar tangda lena teni ngatso dungmar deso tamcho ngatso la pantok rendo reze.
So in doing this, it's necessary that we open our minds. We make our minds open and vast and willing to take on and accept the suffering of others. And by training in this way, it's possible for us to train ourselves to a point where we have no fear whatsoever for suffering. And we will be able to feel that, in fact, if suffering happens to us, it's no big deal at all. If suffering happens, we have a great method for dealing with it, and that suffering, in fact, will be a great opportunity for us to improve ourselves.
mambu chakay orezi yenayang teni ngatso tendi gandhi tendi chakna dumur jemang dendo orezi.
At the present, all of us have great fear of suffering. We worry about suffering, we fear it, whether we will encounter it, whether it will happen to us. But the more we fear it in this way, the suffering that it potentially brings only becomes greater.
Teni tendi ngatso sim go thola tendi jongdar yakpo re sarvi jini teni ngatso lipu thoni tange teni pena khorang rang napa tendi re sona teni nge ngarang da potindi napa nat yongken ge mitsola nge ropa chegen sambanda ota yangna khorang teni orbu tendi re sona oda ngarang da potini me orbu mampo yore nge orbu te sola ropa chegen sambanda ota yangna teni khorang nyamchung ge dungmar tendi mampo yong sona teni ota ngarang da po min nyamchong mambo yoriti nyamchong te solang ropa chegen samne teni korang ka lipo go tone sem go samba chipo maimba lipo go tone teni mate sola ropa chiaga leka de ngots gres.
And by training ourselves in this way, it is possible for us to by training ourselves in respect of the suffering of illness and the suffering of poverty and the suffering of those who are without power, for us not just to wish to take on their suffering at a psychological level, but from this point to really undertake to do concrete acts in order to help people in this situation be alleviated from their suffering.
Teni ngatu jondr tela tenne teni jima kale jondr yagbo zu shongwi jini kanri rendo orezina teni ngatu dungmar la gapsu shinken rendo orez.
And so if we are able to train ourselves really well, then we will ultimately find ourselves becoming people who welcome suffering.
Teni ngatu samla o ta dungmar yona yagbore ta nga dungmar yona gagandu samne teni samgore dungmar yona teni ngarang la litang semla nyangji yapo chetab kundu mi jamba la phamba mombo driptab kundu teni samne teni ta khorang dungmar yona samba rigik shenken rendo orez.
We'll be people who, in fact, think that suffering is something is good, and even think that it would be better if suffering happened to us. From the point of view that suffering enables us to, whether it be suffering in terms of our physical bodies or our minds, enables us to increase in our compassion, increase in our loving kindness, and to improve our ability to be of assistance to others. So from this point of view, we become people who relish and welcome suffering.
Teni dumur tela tenne teni khorang me teni jan la teni nyangji teni ke shinken mo jan la phamba drip shinken teni go teni mase tondang damba teni resong re teni tes chipo cha ka mare teni khorang ka semnang la mi changma la nyangji yak po ke teni mola teni ropa yak po shi teni shi kaps teni shawa tela tenne teni khorang ka sem ga nang la teni dekhi ko chowa teni haliba ga jachim bo yong go yores.
So it's not just through, it's not just that becoming a person who is able to generate compassion and is able to benefit others makes life meaningful, but that by actually experiencing compassion and generating compassion and actually working for the benefit of others, these are things that really produce a strong sense of happiness in an individual's life.
Tini semtok la yopi tini dekhi ko chorwa o dangi me mangbola pantok tap kundu me mangbola tini shawayak bodrup tap kundu ngarang ko mse te tondang damba resong samne di samlo ti tini khorang ko semla salipa ko dekhi yongori ti sem ko thola yopi dekhi ti tini lipu ko thola te naji chaji na te mar onnonni tini mepa chegres lipo nati changro marta yena la lipo nati chichong lan rores.
So this sense of happiness, that is this sense of that one is able to help others, be of benefit to others, that one is actually leading a life that is very meaningful, all of these produce a very strong sense of happiness in one's mind. And this sense of happiness is actually able to subdue the suffering of physical suffering or the suffering of illness. It may not be able to cure an illness, but nevertheless it is able to make this sense of happiness that we experience in our minds is able to make the physical suffering of illness much less.
Teni te nangchu teni dumur tanglin che ya teni tapshi res.
So this is a method of transforming suffering from the Buddhist teachings.
Teni dumur la teni sosorang yarji tongsar ka tapshi res.
And there's also a method of utilizing suffering in order to improve oneself or develop oneself.
Teni litang sem ga dumur te la teni sosorang yarji tongres.
By means of one's own physical and mental suffering, one is able to develop oneself.
Teni ngacho losh ka nalan zambal lang la teni mo chlo gyada la teni zga teni rang chok chok yores.
Every year in the world, about 1 million people commit suicide.
Teni me te so mang chi shu te kan rezena so sem ga nala 등물 망보 용이 점선지레스.
And the majority of these people commit suicide due to feelings of suffering in their mind.
Teni ngaso yang dambalanga 먹은 나라 teni ranchok 젠니 ranchok 좀 마틈 ken금 teni ngaso 초fak시나 teni 로치가 나라 대트소 야가차가 말이지 트스동니다 보여레지 로치가 나라.
And every year it's estimated that in addition to this great number of people who commit suicide, the number of people who attempt to do so but fail to succeed is about 200,000.
Teni ngaso teni ranchok 좀 반다고 teni 삽치보 많이 나요. 영 ngaso 심금 거 나라 teni 등물 mambo 할리바 mambo 용니 teni 등물 때서 제망 로여레스.
And aside from these most severe cases of suicide, there are many, many other people in the world who experience great unhappiness, and their numbers are growing all the time.
Teni karti ngasola mithamala teni jongdrshiya tapshin dendiziyona ngaso ranchok go mari teni nesr sapchin yung mares.
However, if everyone had a method for training their minds in this way, then there would be no need for them to commit suicide. These situations would not become as serious as what they do.
Teni ngaso mi mambo z tarta kandirezina semganala tez marke panrao shoni teni ju chorwa teni khemthrnrao teni ju shona teni ngaso mi mambo z lamsang teni ngaso semkhum go teni mambala teni tonsanrao res.
These days, many people, when they experience some sort of small issue or some small disturbance in their minds or some sort of strange feeling at the level of their minds, the first thing they do is seek out a psychologist or a psychotherapist.
Teni semkum go mambaga teni ngasola o kyorangla semganala nat renduze teni nat tenre nat ndorezine teni nat mambo mangdokoyo rezi terang kyorang napa rendu semkum go napa rezine teni mang teni takayo rezi.
And psychotherapists or psychologists then diagnose these people with all kinds of mental illnesses. That is, that they put names on this illness and that illness. They say that you're a sufferer of this or a sufferer of that.
Teni ngarang so samne o ta ngam napa chakson ta nga semkum go napa re samne sosorang napa yemba ngunzum chege yores.
And then when this happens, the person in question then accepts this label as a sufferer or as a patient, and as a result do in fact become like this.
And
if one is a patient, a sufferer of illness, then it's necessary to take a lot of medicine. And the doctor prescribes us a lot of medication, and we take a lot of it. Of course, I'm not saying that it's not okay to seek out the assistance of a psychotherapist if one does have some mental issues. Of course, this is okay. However, the best solution one can adopt is to address the problem oneself. When we experience a bit of unhappiness in our minds, then this is not necessarily illness or sickness. Of course, there are many kinds of feelings or thoughts or emotions that can arise in our minds, some which may be symptoms of illness and others which are not. However, when one identifies with oneself as a sick person, then this is really harmful to oneself.
심금 끝났 망부 때니 소소랑 거 탁주 시답 그래서.
So, of course, it's okay for us to seek out psychological help in terms of mental issues that we experience. However, it's not necessary to do this in respect of everything. In fact, through meditation and through training our minds, it's possible that we can solve a lot of issues ourselves.
Then ngaso yang simkum goteni nateni hajang chapchin botinri reyona ngaso man te zana yang chokore de yina te simkum go man simkum go nat changala manza go marez.
Of course, if we find ourselves in a situation of serious mental illness, then taking some medication is of course okay, but it's not necessary that we take medication in respect of all or any mental disturbance.
Te karizina ngaso simkum go man zana man kangdang kang zana yang te chikpare man ti khorang sim te la thakar te khorang man shi thab ko mareze te ngaso man kang zana yang da ti man ti sim la thakar teni man shi thab ko mare man ti ngaso lapada man ti ngaso lipola teni man shi ni teni sim la phanpa teni zla samlo tang yores.
And the reason for this is that taking medicine is not able to directly cure our minds. It's not able to do this directly. The way that it works is to work on our brain and on our bodies, and therefore to have some effect on our minds.
Teni ngaso simkum gu jongder ndi teni khorang thakar sim khorang la jongder shi tab gre ma to ba ngaso simkum gu jongder ndi laba la teni jongder shi ni teni sim la phamba Rawota, Yana Lipo Lab Jean Dershini, Tini Simla Pambandao, Teni Mareze, Simkum go Jean Derti, Takar, Teni Simla, Teni Pandok Grace.
The kind of training or mind training that we are talking about is one where we are directly working on our minds. We're directly training our minds or curing our minds. So it's not a situation of working on our brain in order to affect some result on our mind or making some change in our bodies in order to have an effect on our minds. It's training directly on our minds.
Pena ngaso nangchu nangla yena de ti chulu jamba yena te yorang ka tapa yorang shena chokore yorang mashina chokore yana pena nangchu la tapa shena chokore tini yishulung dawo tindi la tapa shena chokore yana chulu chila tapa mashina chokore te kangena khabar yomare susorang ka thachena chokore.
And in terms of these methods of mind training, it really doesn't matter if you're Buddhist or if you're not, or if you're Christian, or if you've got a particular religious faith, or if you've got no religious faith whatsoever. However, mental well-being is something that all of us really need. It's something that everyone requires. Because without it, then we are not able to do anything.
We're
not able to benefit others, and we're not able to experience happiness ourselves. And the absolute most important method of achieving mental health is that in respect of any particular thing or any particular object, we can't cling to it too tightly. It's necessary for us to loosen our grip on things. However, in doing this, it's necessary that we have a method of releasing our grip. Even though we might say that we want to, without a method, it's very difficult for us to actually do it in practice. So tonight, unfortunately, because we don't have much time, I'm not able to go into this in much detail. So just as before, I was only able to give a very simple overview of how we would go about a particular practice.
Tina nga chu sanin da nani nyimani yori ti sanin nga chu shitu nani nga chu shitu la tini nge ti sim te zu ge yang bo xie ya ta xi de tini xia ge yin zi.
However, tomorrow we have, and the following day, we have 2 days of teachings, both in the morning and in the afternoon. And over the course of these teachings, I would like to share with everybody a method for loosening and relaxing our minds.
Tini ti ta xi ti zo nelik da jimsen ge toni tini xia ya ma tok pa ta pa kyang wa ma re zi tini kyarang ta pa yo na yang zhe ge yori ta pa me na yang ti nyamlin chin zhe ge yori.
And the methods that I'm going to be talking about are based on reason and logic. They're not based on faith alone. And so for this reason, they are methods that can be put into practice regardless of what a person's individual faith background may be.
Tani namba tamche pola simkum demo tang kyepo yong tini mse tong tang tamba yong ya tini ge mon den yin tini ngen chat ten ju zok song.
So I really wish that everybody may have great well-being and happiness in their minds and may lead lives of great meaning. And this brings to an end my teaching tonight.
Yeah, teni ta nga chu terang gan chat te jig zok song teni nga chu lojong xia la sonum yore ti sonum de nga chu simchin tamchu pola ngwa she gore teni ngwa zena in zambalang in na re simchin tamchu po teni nerkub se chama demo ta ke po yong teni thartik chama tharwa thoya teni go molum gyabne teni nga chu ngwa she gore.
So in having our teaching this evening, we've generated a great deal of merit, and so I'd like to end with a dedication of this merit to all living beings, that they, by virtue of this merit, may attain happiness and well-being and ultimately liberation from suffering.
Sonam de damja zbanya domne ni be jana bangshi yirga nanje walong zbai zhe bin zo lin zhou a zhou ren xiu oma a hong ban zhen ge zhe ba ma se de hong oma a hong ban zhen ge zhe ba ma se de hong oma a hong ban zhen ge zhe ba ma Thank you so much.